This webinar was recorded for subrecipients of the Tennessee Strong Families Grant on May 20th, 2026. Subrecipients were provided with practical, age-appropriate strategies to create healthy screen habits, encourage balance, and support meaningful offline activities while reducing stress and conflict around technology use. The presentation emphasized realistic approaches that fit into everyday family life rather than strict or unrealistic expectations. The slides and reference materials are posted on our webpage for your reference and review.
But without further ado, today we're going to be learning about screen time guidance from Dr. Rebecca Reneker. Rebecca currently serves as the Manager of Applied Research at sports at the University of Tennessee. She's a certified family life educator through the National Council of Family Relations and an adjunct professor in the Department of Human Development and Family Science at Maryville University. Rebecca earned her PhD in Child and Family Studies at UT Knoxville in 2023 and currently resides with her family in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And I'm very interested and feel like I'm probably going to have all the bad thoughts and things about screen time for myself this afternoon. So I'm looking forward to learning from Rebecca today and hope that you all are too. Thanks for being here, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Brooke. I appreciate that. So we are going to be talking about screen time and digital literacy. Hopefully what we can do is give everyone a better understanding of what screen time is, what the positives and negatives are about screen time in the research, what some recommendations and patterns are. But what I really want you to take away from this is how we meet people where they are, because screen time is just a ubiquitous experience for everyone. So this is our agenda for today. I mentioned some of these already. We're going to be talking a little bit at the end about the family audit and planning session. We'll have a couple of interactive parts. So when I say drop it in the chat, please feel free to drop your answers in the chat, just that you are engaging with our material as much as possible, which will come back up later in the presentation. So screen time is a broad term that can encompass a variety of different digital media activities. So I'll put some of probably the 5 most common ideas on the screen: television, video games, computers, tablets, and smartphones. So each of these devices are going to contribute to the total amount of screen time someone's experiencing every day. So on this list, it's essential to think about screen time not just as entertainment. So we're not just talking about sitting down and watching a movie or sitting down and playing a game. It's anytime we interact with that digital screen. So you might think about checking the weather. I just spent quite a bit of time watching Game Changer, which is an app on my phone so I can follow my son's baseball team. All of that counts as screen time. Even if you're using your computer for work or educational purposes, that's all going to be included. So understanding the different forms that screen time can take can help us to appreciate how it's impacting our life and how much we're actually using. We're also going to think about the way we engage with screen time. So there are 4 common ways that we interact with screens. The first one is a passive user, so just consuming the content. Think of this as sitting on the couch and watching television. It's a one-way experience, and there's very little interaction from the user. I think more often these days we see people scrolling through Facebook or scrolling through videos. That can also be considered passive interaction, because even though you're making the scrolling motion, it's no different than clicking the channels on the television screen. Interactive screen time is when you're having an intentional participation. So thinking about games that you might be playing. Maybe these are smartphone games. Maybe they're sit-down interactive console games or computer games. And then we have all of the different ways we communicate digitally. So right now, sitting in this webinar is a communication type of screen interaction. It might also be texting, answering emails, doing video chats, and those types of things. And then the last one is our content creation. So when I think about content creation for me, it might be creating these PowerPoint slides. It might mean writing something out, writing a report. Anytime you are having an active participation in the experience and creating a product at the end. We see a lot of artists who are turning to digital art. Of course, photography made that transition into digital photography, but all of those things are still considered screen use. So if you'd like to, you already have an opportunity to be interactive. If you'd like to, you can drop into the chat. Which of these types of screen use do you think are most helpful or beneficial? And which do you think are the least helpful for development? and all of the other impacts we'll be talking about in a few minutes. I'll pause for just a second while you drop some answers in there. Okay, so we have a couple of answers. Communication makes life easier and better. Great. Content creation is also really good. That's helpful. It keeps your brain active. If you could be doing it on paper and you're doing it on a screen instead, it's probably not going to come with some of the negative impacts that we're going to talk about on screen time. And then passive is definitely the least helpful for all of us. So we'll be talking about that more as well. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about research. Now, there is so much research out there on screen use and its impacts, especially on children. I do want to start by saying in the academic environment, our research tends to be a bit biased to significant results. So I'm a researcher. I work a lot with early childhood settings. If I were to go in and develop a study and I wanted to say, we're going to examine how much screen time toddlers and preschoolers get during the day with their childcare provider. And then we're going to test their developmental outcomes. And we're going to see if there's a difference. Is there a difference for kids who get 0 screen time versus 1 hour versus 2 hours? And then because I know that there are lots of other things that impact development, I might survey their parents and talk about what's going on at home and throw in a couple other things into my statistical model. If I did all that work and at the end, I said, you know what? There's not much difference. There's no significant difference between these two groups. I'd have a really hard time getting that published. So I say that to say that screen time often gets a bad rap, but we have to remember that most of the research that we're reading is just the stuff that came out significant. So those studies that show fewer effects or no negative effects, you're just not going to see those as much. However, there is a pretty good consensus that there are at least some negative impacts of screen time. So I'm going to share 2 studies with you. The first is a meta-analysis, and I like this because it takes 150 other studies and looks at them kind of all together. It takes all that information together and says, here are a couple of highlights. One of the things that this study found is that the impact of screen time changes as you get a higher dose. So if there's a negative impact to screen time and you're only taking in an hour or 2 a day, you're not going to see as much of an impact as if you're watching 6 or 7 hours of screens per day. There's also a key time period. So that early adolescence time period, I wrote 10 to 14, maybe even ages 8 or 9. They're kind of in a really special stage where their screen use can be more impactful than older or younger children. Some of the things that Teague et al. Found was a positive or a significant effect with social media. So higher social media use is associated with higher depression or problematic internet use or substance use, and with lower academic achievement and a poorer self-perception. So social media in this study, bad. Other digital media use, including some of the communication media and communication interaction we were just talking about, is also associated with higher rates of depression. When they looked at video games, they kind of saw both positives and negatives. So they did see a higher aggression. That might be, when playing video games or after playing video games, but they also saw that children who play video games might have higher attention or executive functioning skills. So those are really interesting findings. The CDC released a study on screen use, and theirs was a lot more broad. So that some of the things that they are reporting is that when your screen use is higher, you have less physical activity. So of course that leads to concerns about weight and physical health. It also impacts your rest and contributes to greater depressive and anxiety symptoms. And then one other thing that the CDC warns about is how increased screen use leads to a less developed social network or social support system. And I think this is probably an idea that most of you are familiar with, that we're very connected to each other digitally, but that may not always translate into those social supports that we need to get through times of crisis. And then the last thing I want to bring up here is this concept of the term technoference. I came across this at a conference probably 6 or 7 years ago, and they were talking about technoference from a romantic relationship standpoint. So it combines the words technology and interference and is meant to describe when you have an interruption in a connection because of technology. So if you can think of like the image of two partners who are getting ready to go to bed for the night, and one of them's laying in bed, the other one comes to bed with a cell phone. So all of their attention is now on the cell phone and not on their partner. And relationships need a lot of that build up time. So they need build and repair time, which a lot of times happens in those tiny transitions, like at bedtime or first thing in the morning when you're getting ready to go. So if you're brushing your teeth while holding your cell phone, you're losing out on an opportunity to kind of connect with your partner. They're starting to use the term technoference in looking at parents' interactions with their children, which I'm really intrigued to see how that, what comes out of that. So the idea that instead of making those meaningful, ongoing day-to-day connections with your child and paying attention to them, giving them that feedback loop that we know is really important for their development, instead the parent's attention is on a screen. And so you can kind of think in the most extreme way, when you put the screen in front of your face, it's almost like shutting the door on someone. So if you can just put yourself into a situation where you're having a conversation with a partner or a family member, and you're in the middle of saying something and their phone dings, they get a notification, they pick it up and look at it. That in your mind is really no different than you being in the middle of a conversation and they shut the door on your face. So that's kind of a really extreme example, but this idea of technoference is really kind of gaining steam and looking at how we might be damaging relationships because of our screen and digital devices. Now, to balance this out, we do have to think about potential benefits to screen time. So there have been a couple of studies that look at things that might be beneficial. These are, again, not as well documented as the negative effects. They're just harder to research, and there aren't as many people looking for positive effects as there are researchers looking for negative effects. But some of the things that we see in positive effects are educational. So we have a lot of schools that use screens and digital technology in education. They can be really helpful. The apps and programs, especially for young children and older adults who might need to build some brain skills to keep themselves sharp, those can be really beneficial ways to use digital technology. It can create downtime. So we do need breaks. We can't go constantly. We will burn out. We can't go constantly all day long. And so a lot of people will use a screen as kind of a built-in break. You sit down on the couch, you rest, you relax, and you kind of take your mind off of things. Even though I mentioned that we aren't building as strong of social networks, you can still use the internet and digital technology to build communities. This is especially important for people who aren't getting out into their community, maybe people who are feeling more introverted or individuals who just can't get out for different reasons. They can build that community network and that sense of support. You can use screens and digital technology to enable teamwork and collaboration, especially if you have a work team that's far apart. I see this in my son. He's 15, almost 16. He plays a lot of online video games, and he's built some really good teamwork skills by doing these interplayer games, and they have to talk to each other and give directions and make plans. That's not me saying that video games, everyone should play them, just that there can be some positive benefits from those. Digital technology can also help us to be more creative. We're seeing this especially with the increase in AI use, is that someone who has good ideas but maybe doesn't have the skills to implement them can use those types of technologies to be more creative. We can use screen time to help people make good decisions, especially our children, as they learn to manage their own screen time. We can help them learn to make good decisions about it rather than just mindless consumption. So really it's about balance. We want to make sure that we're balancing some of the positives while trying to minimize those negatives as much as possible. And last, because I am a parent of 3 children, I do have to put out there that a lot of parents do use screens as an opportunity to take a break from busy parenting schedules. Our parents are feeling very overwhelmed for lots of different reasons, probably more overwhelmed than in prior generations, and they're also getting less hands-on help than they were before. So if you think about even 20, 30, 40 years ago, people just had more help in raising their children, someone to pick them up, someone to take them for a couple of hours. We're just not getting that as much in today's modern family setup. And so parents are using screens, and that often gets a negative connotation, but you can use those in helpful ways if a parent just kind of needs a mental break and the child's not old enough to engage in something on their own. So once again, the goal here is to harness our benefits as much as possible, create a healthy balance. All right, I want to talk about screen time limits or allowances. So I originally had this slide titled recommendations, but I feel like sometimes when we say, here's your screen time recommendation, then you think that's something that a child should have. And instead, we want to think about what their limit probably needs to be. Now, there's not a huge consensus of limits across some of the different platforms. I looked at a couple of different international organizations, the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I kind of came up with these general guidelines that I think would be acceptable to everyone. So these are all up on your screen now. For children under a year, they recommend 0 screen time, nothing at all, no screens in any way. From 1 to 2 years, preferably no screen time at all, and any screen time they do get should be educational in nature. And if you want to, you can drop in the chat what you think educational screen time might look like while I finish up this slide. As they get a bit older, so from 2 to 4, the recommendation is no more than an hour per day. Less is always better. And again, educational in nature is always the best. From 5 to 12, the recommended limit should be 1 to 2 hours per day. They do give, most places that are giving recommendations kind of give a little caveat of a little extra on the weekends is probably fine. So we might think of screen time more of a week to week and less of a day to day because things change from day to day. You may have one day where they have a little bit more screen time and one day where they have a little bit less. Age 13 and older, no more than 2 hours a day, and to avoid screens before bed because it does tend to interfere with your sleep. And then adults, this one is the one I found the most interesting. The others I pretty much knew, but the adult one, 5 to 6 hours a day with lots of breaks to reduce your health risk, like your screen, like your eye fatigue, and to make sure that you're moving. And I found this to be really interesting because I work 40 hours a week and almost all of my work is on a screen. So if I averaged my 40 hours across the 7 days in a week, I'm pretty much maxing out my screen time all the time, which means I wouldn't be able to use screens at any other point in my week. And of course, I am doing that. We'll talk about that in a minute. So keep in mind that while these limits or allowances are in place for a reason, if you're working with a family and you're talking to them about their screen time use and what the recommendations are, we want to keep in mind what actually might be realistic. So I know a couple of families that have 0 screen time rules for their children under 2, but I also know a lot of families that have no screen time rules and their children of any age have kind of open access to different things. So again, we want to meet people where they are. Whenever I'm working with families as a certified life educator, my ultimate goal is to promote their own confidence and not to tell them things and give them information that's going to make them feel guilty and incapable of meeting things. So I want them to do their own goal setting and give them tools and resources so they can come to their own decisions. Okay, so here on this slide, I want to talk about what we're actually seeing in screen use. So I'd love it if you're wanting to be interactive, if you would drop into the chat a guess on the number of hours you think any one of those age groups might be using. So we're just going to look at children here. So you could pick like the 0 to 2 or the 2 to 4 or the 8 to 12 or 13 to 18. Just drop in there. I think 13-year-olds are using this number of hours of screen time per day. Seeing a couple of things go up there, so we'll get in here. So this survey was done in 2021. It could look a little different in 2026. Most of these numbers are pretty consistent in the total amount over the last 5 to 10 years. Where we might see some differences are in the types of screen use they're getting. But in general, we're looking at, so this is over here on the left is 0 to 2, and up here on the right is 13 to 18. You can see an increase in every age group as they go up. At 0 to 2, we're looking at on average 1 hour per day. Because there are some people who have 0-hour screen time rules for their kids under 2, that means that there are a lot of kids that are getting more than an hour a day. And then someone said 2 to 4, about 2 hours. That's right, about 2 hours for kids 2 to 4, about 3.5 hours for kids 4 to 8. It goes up to 5.5 hours for kids 8 to 12. And 13 to 18-year-olds are reporting 8.5 hours on average, which means some is more, of screen time use. And so that total number is that dark green bar. The light green bar is TV and videos. And so one of the things I wanted to point out is that you can see how a majority of their screen time use is still being reported as television and videos. So in 2021, that may have been actual TV. In 2026, we're probably thinking more like short videos, like YouTube shorts, Instagram reels, and that type of thing, which is a little bit different in the way your brain reacts to it than traditional television. Social media use doesn't really start until 8 to 12 years and then increases a bit in 13 to 18 years old. If you've been around teens recently, you might notice that they actually have pretty low rates of social media uptake. If you compare the group of like 13 to 23-year-olds to our group of 24 to 34-year-olds, like they have a lot less social media use. And one of the reasons is because they've gotten the message for a long time to be careful what they put on the internet, to be careful where they post pictures, and be careful what they say online. So they have a little bit less of an uptake of social media than if you were to compare this to an adult. And then you can see gaming starts, that's the light blue bar, that starts pretty young and then moves up a little bit. I think that's another one that you might see changing as we get more and more smartphone apps that are games geared toward younger children.
Hey, Rebecca, I have a quick question. You may not have an answer for this, but I was wondering if you had any ideas about how the educational stuff plays into this as well. Because even like when I taught elementary school in Florida in 2020 to 2023, they were already having like one-to-one devices, for students to do online learning. And like there was a certain amount of minutes that we had to put them on certain educational, programs each week. And so I was wondering if you had any idea about that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there was a huge trend starting back, I'd say even before, like even pre-COVID, there was a trend toward the one-to-one devices. Post-COVID, we went so hardcore digital that they were doing math lessons digitally. They were doing a 15-minute lesson and 45 minutes on these online devices. We're actually seeing that reverse a little bit now. One, because they've realized that test scores are actually down, they're not up. Outcomes for kids are down, they're not up. So unfortunately, that group from 2020 to 2025 was kind of a guinea pig group for us. But in high schools, they're moving toward writing on paper instead of writing on devices. Part of that is AI also. So we have a lot more like cheating going on with AI than we did when they were just using the computers. But yes, that is an interesting. So if you think about these 8 to 12 or 8 to 18-year-olds even, the sleep recommendation for this age group is 10 hours a day. And then they're in school for like 8 hours a day. So that really only leaves 6 hours left in their day. And if you go based on this, they're just sitting around watching videos the rest of the time, or they're not sleeping, or they're watching and using their digital devices during school hours. So that is big. I just had a conversation with parents of children who are 5 and under, and one of their concerns about screen time is what they're getting in their childcare facilities. Like, are the providers being forthright and open about screen time, what's appropriate? Most parents of kids 5 and under don't want their kids to have any screen time at their childcare facility. One, because they know it's not as helpful for learning as being hands-on, but also because then it takes away any availability to use it at home, if it might be helpful there. So yeah. When we're working with families, the first thing that we often ask them to do if they're budgeting or trying to be healthier eaters is to ask them to write down how much money they're spending or what they're eating. So we can do the same thing with screen time. Is the first step we can do is like, let's do a screen time audit. How do we figure out how much screen time we're using? If you know what your screen time use is, drop it in the chat. If you have a smartphone, if you don't know what your screen time use is, you can use your smartphone to pull it up. So I have an iPhone. I just go into settings and click my name, and then I click screen time, and it comes up and tells me what my average is, which I'm going to share with you on the next slide. It also gives you the most used apps or websites, so you can know where you're spending your time, how you're spending your time. And then this one I really love is what you look at when you pick it up. So it'll tell you, and I can't believe it can track this, but it will tell you how many times you pick up your phone in a day. And then it will tell you what app or what part of your phone you clicked on when you picked it up. So if you know yours, if you're like, oh, I know I use this number of screen time hours, don't worry about adding in your work hours. Just think about maybe outside of work hours screen time. But this can be a step that can be really helpful when you're starting to talk with families, is especially if they're worried about how much screen time their kids are, is just start tracking it, just start paying attention to what it is. So this is my screen time use. And again, I already mentioned that I work about 8 hours a day, and a lot of that's on the computer. So this is in addition to that. It's about 3.5 hours per day. Sometimes it's more on the weekend, sometimes it's not. About 45 minutes of it is on social media. Facebook is the one I go to the most. It's a little higher the last few weeks than it has been previously. I do have a screen limit on my social media because I want my brain to know it's time to take a break when it comes up. So every 15 minutes, I have to give myself permission to use it. About 20 minutes on an e-reader or a Kindle. I do messages, 30 minutes or more a day. That might be text messages. It might be messages from my children's school, things like that. That's also my most frequent pickup. And the reason for that is because I have all other notifications on my phone turned off. So nothing else notifies me except my messages and my kids' school. And that is to help keep me focused on my work throughout the day and not constantly distracted by my phone. I have some time that I do in the evenings outside of work, regular work hours on work-related activities, and then an hour or more on different things. This is just kind of whatever happens to be going on that day. Today's was Game Changer, yesterday's was Zillow. Maybe it's shopping, things like that. So as you can see, if I'm doing 3.5 hours of screen time outside of work hours, I'm blowing out that 5 to 6 hour recommendation or screen time limit that the CDC is telling me I should be following, and putting myself at risk for some negative outcomes. So why do we spend so much time on screens? That's, I think, the big question. This is where we're going to get a little bit into some theory and behaviorism. So it's really important for us to know and remember that while screen time can have some benefits like social interaction, opportunities for connecting and relaxing, because of the negative outcomes that could be aligned with this, like the increases in depression and the decreases in physical health, then it's important to understand how and why we're interacting. So the how is kind of those screen time tracking, how much, what am I doing? The why is this part. So entertainment is something we want to come back to. It makes us feel good. Also, the majority of these apps and platforms are actually designed to be habit forming and addictive. So you can expect that when you're on it, it's doing everything it can to keep your dopamine levels high, to keep you engaged. That's why you get Facebook notifications every time someone likes something. It's why you get notified if somebody comments on your Instagram reel or retweets you. They're not tweets anymore, but you understand what that means. And every time you get a notification, it kind of draws you back into that cycle. So it's important for us to remember that. Social learning theory tells us a couple of things. One of the things it tells us is that we model for each other, and also that we follow kind of what other people are doing. So when we're looking from a family perspective, a parent can model good or bad screen behavior or screen health to their children. If you have a parent who's always on a screen, then the child is going to be like, that sounds great, I want to do it too. A great example of this is this past weekend. The weather was great. My husband and I were both outside doing yard work. Our older daughter was, I think, reading a book or doing something. And so our almost 6-year-old was perfectly happy to just hang out outside and play. I think she spent a good amount of time mixing sand, water, and flower petals together into some sort of brew. But if we were to go inside and we were all sitting around outside, sitting around inside with a screen in front of us, then she's immediately going to say, where's my screen? I want to be on a screen also. So we're kind of norm some behavior within those social groups. Also, if you think about anytime you're out in public, so I encourage you as you go around the next couple of days and you're thinking about this, that you kind of watch your own behavior and other people's behaviors. If you're sitting in a waiting room at the eye doctor's office or at the dentist's office or wherever you are, and you notice that everybody else around you picks up their phone and they're using it, they're looking at stuff, just think about how your body is wanting to react. Are you wanting to reach for your phone also? Are you trying to pick it up because that's what everyone else is doing? Are you feeling uncomfortable because you're the only one who's not doing it? Because we are social creatures, and one of the things that we want to do is fit in with the crowd. And this is why it's important to take a whole family perspective, and the whole family kind of has to be on board with doing the same thing together. You can't have a screen-free week if one person is going to be just using screens whenever they want to. So creating some intentionality is really great when you're doing this, but it does sometimes you have to kind of fight against your instincts and what you want to do. But if we can if we can use that intentionality, then maybe we can avoid getting sucked back into that cycle. And we're going to talk about some ways that we can do that here in one of the later slides. All right, on this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about screen time alternatives. And I'm going to pause and let you, if you have a great alternative to screen time, something that works well for you or people that you know, feel free to drop that in the chat. All right, so outside time is in the chat. Outdoor time is kind of the #1 alternative they give you for screen time. Just go outside, take a walk, play a sport, go to the playground if you have kids, do whatever it takes just to get outside and kind of refresh. This is actually a really good thing, even if you do have to be in front of a computer all day long, when you do take your breaks to go outside, because those just increase your health, overall mental health especially. They give you examples like board games, crafts and creative activities, listening or playing music, you can listen or play, reading or listening to books, dressing up or doing imaginative play. That one was recommended by my almost 6-year-old. When I asked her what the best thing to do was when you're not watching a screen, she said dress up and go play. Or you could do STEM and learning activities. Maybe this looks like puzzles, maybe this is some sort of little activity, or you can sit down and write. Journaling is a great option if you're sitting down and if you think of screen use as an addictive behavior, then you want to do the same types of things as if you're trying to manage any other kind of addiction, which is you have to have a substitute for it to give you the same kind of reaction and dopamine and happy feeling that you might get in a screen. And that works the same for adults as it does for kids. So if you have a child who's coming up and asking to watch a screen, you almost have to give them a replacement. You can't just say no, because they're still kind of demanding that reinforcement. If you notice anything about all of these different alternatives, it is that they're kind of all intentional. So if you are going to go outside and I'm an adult, I can just go outside whenever I want. Obviously, I'm probably not playing a board game by myself, but I could do a lot of these things as an adult on my own. But if I'm a family that has kids under the age of 5, a lot of these things are not just easy for them to go do. They have to have some direction. Maybe this has to be organized by a parent or a caregiver. And that's, I think, where we find challenges when we're working with families to implement the changes, is that they just maybe have a harder time because they have to be so intentional. They have to plan ahead. And so we can work with families and talk about setting up screen-free zones where they have some of these things available. They have books or games. Maybe they have a no screens in your bedroom rule. So if you're bored, you can go to your bedroom and play, but the screen doesn't go with you. And we'll talk more about using screens in certain places again here in a second. But I do think that one of the challenges I've always found anytime I've been trying to balance my children's screen time is when they say, oh, just do this. It feels really challenging for a busy parent to just go and do some STEM activities. You have to be planned ahead, and you have to be ready for that. And that doesn't work real well if you're using screens in part. Really any child under the age of maybe 14 or 15. Another thing that we can do with families to effectively manage our screen time is that we can do the screen time audit. So that starts with watching what our screen use is looking like, doing those screen time trackings, maybe on our smartphones, maybe writing things down. So once we know how much screen use we have in the family, then we can start to set some goals and expectations. So what is realistic for this family to do? Is it going to be zero screen time, or is it going to be, screen time within certain limits? Are you going to just do it at certain times of the day, just on the weekend? What is the goal and expectation? As soon as you have a goal, then you can really start to set the steps in place to be able to follow those. One of the things that's really crucial is accountability and responsibility. So when our older children got to be teenagers and we decided that they were ready for the responsibility of having a phone of their own, my husband and I had a conversation. He said, I do want them to have a phone, but I want to take it away from them at night. I don't want them to have it in the bedroom. And that's actually a recommendation that a lot of people will make, is take it away from them at night. That way they can sleep. They're not worried about it. You have it, they're not getting onto anything that they shouldn't be getting onto. Except that he didn't want to be the one responsible for going and taking it from them every night. So that didn't work for our family, because I also was not going to be the one responsible for that. So we found an alternative, and that was switching the family to the iPhones, where you can set those downtime limits. You can actually tell it which apps they can access and can't access at certain times of the day. You can shut it off completely. So it really didn't matter if the phone was in their bedroom, because after 9 p.m., they just couldn't get on it anyway. Everything was turned off except emergency calling. But you have to have somebody who's going to be accountable and responsible. You can't just set a rule about screen time and then expect people to follow it. You have to have that reinforcement. If you're working with a family about screen time and they're struggling to decide what's the most important, maybe we prioritize safety and health. And so helping them teach about not sharing their personal information online, maybe encouraging them to limit social media use for their younger children because of the negative mental health effects, especially for those early adolescents. Maybe that's good. Maybe you can talk to them about physical health and how screen time might be bad for their physical development. Getting them outside, moving around is better for lots of different things. Their mental health, their physical health, and their cognitive development, especially if they're younger children. So just find what's the goal? What's that pain point of, what's going to make this important to a family? Remind families that they have to model balance for their children. So being controlled in your own screen usage helps the rest of the family to also be controlled and balanced in that. You can start small or go big. So I think if you're familiar with kind of work management, it's either check off all the easy things first or eat the frog, get the big thing down and out of the way. So you can do this with screen time also. Some people just say, we went screen free. We just took away all the devices. And if that works for the family, that's a great choice. That doesn't work for a lot of families. So maybe it's start with small adjustments rather than completely changing everything. I was talking to someone the other day who said they called it going analog. She said, we went analog. So if we want to Google something, it happens at the computer. And if we want to watch TV, it happens on the television. And the only thing we use our phone for is to just send messages and make phone calls. They kind of went back to an old school way of doing things. And she said by deleting the internet, like she deleted the internet apps and the Google apps, and she deleted all those things from her smartphone so that she couldn't use them, or at least she hid them so she couldn't get to them easily. But whichever they choose, understand that as families grow and develop and change, the screen time plans and digital plans might also need to change. You're not going to have the same screen time needs or rules with a 2-year-old as you are with a 12-year-old. And you also may not have the same things, from week to week or month to month or season to season. You may have seasons where things have to be a little bit different. And remember, my goal when working with families is always to help them make those decisions for themselves, to give them the tools and resources that they might need to be confident in the decisions that they're making for their family. All right, here are a couple really easy switches for families. So if you are working with a family who wants to make some changes in their screen time use, then here are a couple of things you can do. The first one is to always choose educational content. That might be in a learning app versus any other smartphone game app. There are so many smartphone game apps that are being developed for the 4+ range. And so these 4, 5, and 6-year-olds are doing a ton of capybara cooking, and I'm going to slice some fruit, and they're not really engaging with it in educational content. So if you can choose educational content there, or when doing like TV and video viewing, that's always a positive change. Watching together. So this kind of, again, goes against that parents using screens to help them step away from their children's needs a little bit. But if you can engage with your child or with each other when in front of a screen, that can be really helpful because it kind of changes the way the screens are used. I'll give you an example of how we do this, which is I have older children and a younger child. So a lot of times we're driving around in the car, and that's when my almost 6-year-old gets her screen time, is because she's just stuck in the car for 45 minutes. She's not going to be outside playing during this time. So she gets her screen time at that point. But I'll ask her questions. What are you watching right now? What's happening in your video? What part did you find the funniest? And by asking her questions, I've kind of made it more of an engaging activity and less of a passive activity for her. Using built-in screen limits for all family members. I mentioned my social media has a screen limit. Actually, all of my apps, except for my messaging and my work email, have screen limits. And what that does is it interrupts the dopamine cycle, and you have to give yourself permission to continue to engage in that activity. And so that can help if you have a child who's just kind of, they kind of get zoned in, even from a very young age. They'll get really zoned in on the screen, and they'll have a hard time pulling themselves away. And so that screen time limit gives them an immediate break that they may not otherwise get. Turning off notifications, removing apps that you aren't really needing all the time. Again, those non-essential notifications, when they ding, you pick up the phone and then you get worked into other things. So that's really a phone thing. Also, kind of a phone thing is naming the purpose, which is saying, I'm going to check the weather when you pick your phone up. You check the weather, and once that's done, you've kind of given your brain permission to put the phone back down when you're done with it. So you can do that. I like that, especially to combat that idea of technoference. So my husband has finally started doing that because I kind of got on him about his screen use when we were in the middle of a conversation. I was like, you're ignoring me again. So he'll look at me, he'll look up, make eye contact, and say, I just got a really important text message. I'm going to reply to it, and then I'll be back in this conversation again. And so because he's naming the reason that he's ignoring me, it makes me feel less like he's ignoring me, if that makes sense. And so I do that also with our youngest child. She was, I picked up my phone during bedtime, which I often don't do. And she got upset. She's like, why do you have the phone? It's bedtime. We're not supposed to have phones at bedtime. And I was like, your brother, who's not at home right now, he's traveling with his school, has sent me a message. I need to respond to it, make sure it's not anything that's really important. So just naming that purpose can help. It helps you give yourself permission to put the phone back down, but it also helps with that technoference piece. And then the no screen times or locations. I mentioned, maybe you make bedrooms screen free, but if you do nothing else, I encourage families to make the dinner table screen free, because that just gives you an opportunity to engage with each other. Again, if you think of your phone as like a door in front of your face, you wouldn't want to be all sitting 10 feet away behind closed doors eating. You want to be sitting at the same table together eating. So you put the phone down, like opening up the door. So the key takeaways when we're thinking about this, it's not on this screen, but I want to remind you that screen time gets a bad rap. And while there are some challenges to it, there can be benefits. But really the ultimate idea is that we want to be about balance, about balancing some of the positives while minimizing the negatives, while also being realistic about the role and experience of screens in our lives. Because most families are not going to be screen-free families. So key takeaways, making sure that families are setting realistic goals for them that meet, their desires and their ultimate plan for their family. Whenever you're using a screen, know why you're using it. If there's an alternative to that screen, a great one is like music for kids. If they are asking to watch screens, put music on instead. Anything to kind of make those tiny switches. It's really helpful to build those healthy habits as a family that makes them easier to sustain if everyone's pulling together in the same direction. Parents or people in charge should always be modeling the behavior they want to see in everyone else. And then again, it's all about balancing essential and non-essential screen use in your family and your life.